Hello, folks, and welcome back, as usual, to our live broadcast covering our most recent lessons. Today, we're going to be covering, Lesson 12 and Lesson 13. That's going to be Sections 9, 10, 11, and 12 from the Comprehensive Rules for Formats, as well as the Tournament Regulations. I'm just going to hang out here and chat with folks in chat for a couple minutes as folks trickle in from the Discord or wherever else they might be coming. How's everyone doing today? Gosh, I don't even know what time is. I don't know what day it is. Today's Tuesday. I do these broadcasts on Tuesday. I should know what day it is. Things are going good. I'm working on, oh gosh, it's a while from now, but some future lesson. I think next Thursday's lesson? I don't know. As unsurprisingly, I'm going to be traveling again this weekend, so I won't be around for the Friday live broadcast. We won't have one on Friday. We're just going to jump straight to next Tuesday for our next live broadcast. That broadcast will be covering lessons 14 and 15, which are going to be the master event document and taking a judge call. Lessons 13, 14, 15 are a slightly different format than our traditional PowerPoint with card image. I threw up videos of myself because there's not really a lot of cards to talk about in those. So it's just going to be a lot of rambling. It's going to be very similar. These aren't as technical, these lessons on the tournament regulations, the master event doc, that sort of thing. They're more philosophical. And so the lessons already contain a bunch of me just looking at the camera and rambling. Just Leon, if I'm reading that right, says hello, and I say hello back. Thanks for joining us. As always, as we get these broadcasts started, or at any point during them, please feel free to throw in questions, comments, concerns. I am more than happy to go on tangents about anything related to Star Wars Unlimited or the Judge program. Probably a little too happy to go on tangents. Hey, Lou Cordero. Nice to see ya. But yeah, I'm just rambling to fill up space while folks trickle in, and this is when I'm really desperate for questions, because I don't know what to say here, so I'm just making noise at y'all, and looking for some sort of engagement. We'll get it eventually. We'll figure out how this streaming thing works. I want to make sure that there's some time for folks to show up before we actually start the lesson, so people don't miss the educational portion. It's okay if they miss the entertaining portion, whether it's me being entertaining or you being entertained by my bumbling or whatever it is. Evening, Cascade, how you doing? But yeah, we're just chatting. I'm excited for these lessons. As a rules nerd, the comprehensive rules are near and dear to my heart. As somebody who's been judging for a decade, the softer skills, the understanding of how to run a good tournament, that's much more exciting for me because I think that's a much harder skill to master. I can teach you how a unit comes into play or leaves play, and it's very clear and obvious because the rules say this is how it happens. Generally speaking, there are some holes in the rules, and as new cards come out and new abilities are premiered, we'll have more and more questions. But how do you make people have fun is a much more difficult and nuanced question, and it brings me a lot of joy to bring people joy, which is great for me. So these tournament regulations and policy and making sure that people have a quality, fun, fair experience is very important to me. Luke Cordero asks, Twin Suns, what is it? What does it eat? Where does it live? So Twin Suns are the two suns around Tatooine and also a format, and we're going to talk about it. And I think they've made some really fascinating choices with Twin Suns as somebody coming from Magic the Gathering and Commander, which a lot of people compare the two. But I think I've rambled enough. We're a couple minutes past the start time for the broadcast. So I think we can actually just dive right into formats. So let's get started. Formats are different ways to play the game. Just Leon has a question regarding one of the leaks of the next set of spoilers, because I don't believe... Okay, so tangent time. You know what? We're just going to cut back real quick. Hello, tangent time. So, I'm pedantic. You're shocked to hear that. For me, there's a difference between a leak and a spoiler. A spoiler is a card that was intentionally previewed by an approved body. So if FFG goes to a content creator and says, reveal this card on this date, that's a spoiler. If I somehow find a booster pack a month early, open it up, take pictures of it, and put it on the internet, that's a leak. Or if, like, that, anyways. Partial to reveal. Reveal is also good language for spoilers. I think spoilers and reveal are in a similar area. Leak, to me, falls under a little bit more illicit. And so, speaking of, if you find something that's not an official spoiler or not officially revealed by FFG or one of their partners, if, say, somebody found some packs and cracked them a month or 2 months early or whatever, please don't share them on the Judge Program Discord. We want to be respectful of our partners' intellectual property and not spread that sort of thing. You can discuss it, but not share it around. Just Leon, don't worry about it. Absolutely nothing to apologize for. I have lots of opinions about language, and English is my first language and only language. And so I have a lot of opinions about technical use, and so I share them with people. This wasn't targeted at you. This was just, hey, this is going to be in front of some number of people. And I know a lot of people, including a lot of English speakers, who use leak and spoiler interchangeably. And for me, words have meaning and they have one meaning. But that's a little bit pedantic of me. Anyways, regarding the interaction of Clone and Force Lightning, do I have an answer about this or not yet? So Clone, for those of you who haven't been keeping up, is a card that comes into play as another unit in play. I don't have any answers about how this works explicitly. However, my presumption is that it will, one, trigger any when played when you play it, because it is entering as a copy. And two, using Force Lightning on it will turn it into a blank copy of whatever it copied. So it will... The ability isn't a constant ability. It isn't like Clone is a copy of another unit. It says when it enters, it becomes a copy of another unit. And so for me, that sounds like a one-shot effect rather than something that can be erased. But that is not an official answer, and we're going to have to wait until the comprehensive rules come out, because this is a new mechanic that hasn't been covered before. Anyways, back to the lesson that we really hadn't started. See, I love tangents, whatever. Let's go back. Great. Formats. Formats are different ways to play the game. They are generally defined by deck construction rules and the number of players. So the primary way most people are going to be playing is Premier Constructed. That's going to be a 2-player game with Premier decks, which is up to 3 cards. We'll get to that in a second. But constructed formats have players building their decks beforehand. Limited formats have ones build packs from, or build a deck from a limited set of cards, hence the name Limited. It does get weird when you're playing Star Wars Unlimited Limited, because it's a little bit contradictory, but let's move forward. Right, 2-player constructed formats. Right now, there's only Premier, which has exactly 1 leader, exactly 1 base, a minimum of 50 other cards in the deck, a maximum of a 10-card sideboard. This isn't in the comprehensive rules. It's covered in the tournament regulations, which talk about tournament play. At home, you're not playing best of 3s or best of 1s. You're not playing in any structured event. And so you can do whatever you want. But if you want to be playing this expected format, minimum 50 cards in the deck, maximum of 10 cards in the sideboard. However, if you're testing and trying to figure out what is a good deck configuration, you can have your entire collection as cards you swap out in between games because you're not playing in a tournament. You can also have no more than 3 copies of a card. A copy of a card is a card that has the exact same printed attributes, including type, name, subtitle, power, aspect, all of that good stuff. That means that you can have Boba Fett collecting the bounty and Boba Fett, the unit whose subtitle I can't remember off the top of my head because those are not the same copy of a card. Similarly, you could be running a bunch of different Chewbacca's because those are, even though they have the same name, they're not copies of each other. With clone, even though it makes itself into a copy of cards, it doesn't count as a copy of the card when in deck construction because it's its own card. Limited formats have exactly one leader, exactly one base, a minimum of 30 other cards in the deck, and all other cards in the card pool are in the sideboard. This means when you draft or play sealed, every single card you open in a booster pack and either draft and add to your draft pool or just open in sealed, like in a pre-release, is part of your sideboard. You can have any number of copies in your deck. So if you open 3, 4, 5, 6, 12 Phase 1 Clone Troopers in your sealed pool, or you draft a bunch of Phase 1 Clone Troopers, you can have a nice little clone army. It's highly unlikely you'll get massive numbers of any one card, but you're not restricted by game rules in how many you can have, just by how many you open. Of note, if you are playing best of 3 in a limited format, you are allowed to change your leader in between games, and you're allowed to change your base in between games. This is not something that you can do in Constructed. In Constructed or in Premier, you cannot have leaders or bases in your sideboard. I think it'd be really cool if you could. Switching from, like, I don't know, Iden to Kira. Yeah, that's something you could plausibly do without having to rebuild your entire thing. And do some really wacky stuff, and having transformative sideboards would be very cool, but it's also very reasonable that you can't. But in Limited, you can. You have to have the leader in your pool, and we'll talk about what determines your card pool in a moment. But you don't have to have a common base in your pool for the aspect that you're interested in playing. You are allowed to borrow any basic base that you would like. That is to say, a base that has 30 HP, no abilities, and is common. There aren't rules for proxying these, but generally if a player's like, hey, I want to play a red base, but nobody seems to have a spare red base, can I just proxy one? I'd be like, yes, absolutely, because the idea is that you're not limited by what base you can play, and that'd be a extraordinarily unlikely scenario wherein 24 bases were opened in a draft and all of the red bases are in use. There's probably some that are available. In any case, let us move on to what a card pool is, because that is important for Limited. In the card pool is the cards you open in sealed or the cards you draft in draft. In sealed, you're going to open up 6 packs, generally of the same set. All the cards that are opened, including the 6 leaders that you open, are going to be part of your pool for that event. With this example pool, you could build like a Sabine green deck as your first deck, and because it's in your sideboard and in sealed you're allowed to do this, you could have a Grand Admiral Thrawn Vigilance deck as your sideboard deck, and you can swap into that. Let us keep on moving. I also just really like this graphic. I like the pretty rainbow. It makes me happy. Anyways, limited formats. Draft. Right. So here's the draft procedure. Draft is a little bit more complicated. Tennessee Feet Monk says, as long as it takes 3 minutes or less, right? Yeah. If you want to swap decks in sideboarding in a limited event, switching from one deck to the other needs to take a reasonable amount of time. Policy says 3 minutes as a guideline. Essentially, if you want to swap decks, you should have that other deck built and sleeved up. So you can just be like, okay, sideboarding, I'm just going to switch decks entirely. And just taking a different deck out of your deck box, as long as it's part of the same pool, is entirely viable. I've done that at a pre-release and just was like, okay, game 1, I'm going to try and play control. Okay, that didn't work well. Let's just switch to hard aggro and see if I can take you out for game 2. And sometimes your opponent will sideboard a little bit in preparation for you to play as a specific type of deck, and you can just, if they take out all of their removal because they're like, oh, you're a slower control deck, or if they side in some inefficient units to deal with the fast aggressive deck and you switch styles on them, you can pull a fast one. But yeah, if you're going to do this, or if players are going to do this, I recommend having them build the deck beforehand and having it sleeved up beforehand so that the swap is near instantaneous. Now, moving on to the process of draft. In drafting, if you're familiar with sports drafts or various other drafts, you're going to have a selection that you can pick from. You'll pick one card from it, and then you'll get another selection, and so on and so forth. The specific process is each player is going to open the 3 packs that they're given, remove the leaders, and not look at the other cards. When you open a pack, you'll see on one side the face of a leader, and then the other side you'll see the back of a Star Wars Unlimited card. You'll take the leader, you'll pull it out, and you'll add it to a pile, and make sure to keep the rest of the pack face down. When you are taking that pack face down, you may accidentally see the next card. However, the next card is always going to be a base, and so it does not give you a ton of information if you accidentally see this information. Second, when you are separating out the leaders and putting the packs down, make sure to keep the packs distinct so they don't get shuffled together. Then you will draft the leaders. So you're going to take the 3 leaders that you've opened, and every other player in your draft pool is going to, or draft pod is going to take their 3 leaders, look at them, pick one, add it to your draft pool, which is going to be a collection of face down cards, and pass the remaining 2 to the player to your right. You will take the 2 cards coming from the player to your left, look at them, pick one, add it to your pile, and pass the last card. After you do that, you'll pick up your first pack, remove the base and token, and then look at the, I think it'll be at this point 13 remaining cards, it might be 12. Look at those cards, select one, add it face down to your pool, and pass the pack to your left. You'll take the 12 cards coming into you from the person on your right. You'll look at them, pick it, pass, and you'll continue to pass left until you've run out of cards in that pack. Then you'll pick up the second pack, draft in a similar process, passing right. Then the third pack, you'll pass back to the left. This means that there's some strategic information and like how you figure out what other people are drafting. There's some complicated stuff that I don't understand, or I vaguely understand, but that's not the responsibility of the judge to understand the strategic depth that passing in different directions offers. It just means that, like, if one player is going hard into a color and cutting you off to a degree because they're taking all of the good cards in that color, when you're passing in the other direction, there's a chance that you'll be opened up to that color and be able to draft it as well. You are allowed to look at your draft pool during the draft. However, you must make sure that you're not holding on to any other set of cards. You're not looking at a pack and looking at your draft pool at the same time. They need to remain very distinct. Similarly, or additionally, the cards in your draft pool are hidden information. No other player in the draft pool should be able to see what cards you're drafting other than the leaders that you've drafted, because those are double-sided, and it's really hard to hide 2 sides of a card. And so leaders are going to be always public information, whereas every other card is going to be hidden information, and that information should not be revealed. This is because if one player sees what cards you're drafting, if you're able to show them, hey, I took this card at this point in time, this can do 2 different things. One, it lets them know if you are playing in a color, and then that warns them to stay out of that color, because that way you don't fight over it, and so there's some implicit collusion potential there. And similarly, it lets them know when a specific card was picked up, and so if they're tracking, if you say, pick up a powerful but not first pick worthy green card, if you give that information to another player, even accidentally, they now know that each player between you and them did not draft that card, which gives them some more strategic information. Just Leon says, so you can't try to hide your leader, right? Correct. You are explicitly instructed to display all 3 of the leaders that you've drafted. Over the course of time, they will be covered up, but if any player during the draft says, hey, can I see what leaders you drafted? That is something that you are required to reveal. With both draft and sealed, after you get your card pool, so after you complete the draft process or after you open your 6 packs, you will build your deck and then play your matches with your decks following normal tournament structure. You must make sure that your card pool remains separate from any other cards you may have acquired. So if you're doing 2 pre-releases back to back, make sure that your pre-release kit remains separate from your other cards. If things get mixed up, it can be... Some people may be concerned that you've added cards to your draft pool, and that's not a good thing. Even if the cards aren't high power, even if it's just a couple of commons, having a couple more Death Star Stormtroopers or something like that can really make a draft deck come together. Lou Cordero says, leaders are public even before drafting. I know it makes sense, but I've only played 1 draft so far, and it was very casual, so is there any additional process in a more high-stakes event? I believe after... So you draft your 3... I believe the way it works is everybody opens up the packs, reveals the 3 leaders that they have opened, and then you draft. So because they're double-sided, this information is all public. And it remains public as the draft occurs, and as you are continuing the draft, you can ask those questions. However, there isn't a lot of policy regarding limited procedure, because draft and sealed are both intended currently for casual play only. The only competitive tier events are going to be Premier. There will... FFG is currently not sanctioning or sponsoring any limited competitive events. Tennessee Feet Monk says, policy question currently doesn't cover Wandering Eyes during a draft. Is there direction if it becomes an issue? I think that there is some policy that covers this. A player is doing something that is giving them an advantage that they are not allowed to do. If the player is not aware that they're not allowed to look at other people's packs, then you educate them and tell them not to do it. And if the player is aware, I think that it falls under cheating and they should be disqualified. However, again, you are generally not going to be running drafts at competitive rules enforcement level. A lot of them are going to be very casual. It's very possible... there have been a lot of store drafts that I've been involved in for other games, or even just like playing with friends, where it's very relaxed, and the restrictions on communication, either revealing cards or talking about what you drafted, are very much relaxed. So before you start disqualifying players for their actions, like if somebody reveals a card and it's like, holy crap, I can't believe that I opened like a Hyperfoil Vader, this is insane. Or somebody's just like, how on earth did you pass a Hyper Vader to me? Like, why would you do that? And they're like, well, I opened a Hyperfoil Vader. You're like, oh, I understand. Even if that sort of thing is happening, I wouldn't jump straight to disqualification. At these casual tier events, players may not realize the implications of impact on strategy for revealing that sort of information, because they're like, well, I'm willingly giving up my own strategic advantage. I'm not giving anybody else one. It's a little bit more complicated than that. Peeking at somebody else's draft picks or at what they're doing, I think that one's a lot harder to defend, but I think it also does fall under basic cheating. Alrighty. Playing with more than 2 players. Star Wars is designed to be a game played with your friends, and sometimes you have more than one friend. I can't speak for myself, but I'm sure some of you have more than one friend, and so maybe you're going to want to play a game with 2 or 3 other people. There are a few changes in how the game plays out. First of all, everything that starts with the active player and then goes to the non-active player and goes back and forth starts with the active player and proceeds clockwise from them. So that's mulligans, resourcing, turn order. If you have a bunch of triggers that need to go on the stack, again, you start with the active player and then go and decisions are made in that same sequence. If decisions need to be made, essentially. Also, all players must pass to proceed to the next phase, which is different from just 2 players passing. If just 2 players passing in sequence could move you to the next phase, some people could be very mean to the 3rd or 4th player. Octurnal says, no stack bad Jonah. Jonah says, yeah, I try so hard. I try so hard. And then I'll just say stack. And it's wrong. And I should feel bad, and I do feel bad. So thank you for calling me out. I will improve my language over time. Sentinel applies only to attacks against that player. If you are attacking another player, or if you want to attack, say, player B, for lack of a better name, and player C has a Sentinel, you can attack player B even though there's a Sentinel in play. However, if you want to attack player C or a unit player C controls, because they have a Sentinel, you need to follow the rules regarding Sentinel. If a player is defeated, they leave the game immediately. All cards they own are removed from the game. So that means if, say, if you had used Traitorous on an opponent's unit and that player was defeated, that player leaves the game, the unit that you stole leaves the game, and your Traitorous, now no longer attached to anything, will go to your discard pile. All cards that other players owned are put into their owner's discard pile. So if I controlled a bunch of your stuff, say with Traitorous, Change of Heart, that sort of thing, I'm defeated. All of the cards that I controlled that I did not own will go to their owner's discard piles. Any triggered abilities waiting to resolve that I owned and controlled do not resolve. So that's something like a when played or that sort of thing. Like if I die in combat and there's a trigger that I controlled that was waiting to resolve, those aren't going to resolve. However, lasting and delayed effects will resolve best they can. This means that if I played Hello There on a unit, gave a unit -4/-4, and then I'm defeated, that ability wearing off will still occur at the end of the round. It's not going to become permanent just because I left the game. Players can also make deals with each other. They can say, I won't attack you if you remove this unit, or I won't attack you if you won't attack me. But nobody is held to those agreements. You can do whatever you want with your agreements, and your word is as good as you can convince your friends it is. Additionally, opponent is any other player, even if you have a deal, even if you agree to be friends, you're still opponents. Tennessee Feet Monk says, MTG is the devil. I can neither confirm nor deny, but I can confirm that there are a lot of creatures with the type devil in Magic, so you draw your own conclusions. Just Leon says, does that mean that technically even the leader in the base goes into the discard pile? If you somehow were able to take control of another player's leader in base, and they were still in the game, and then you're defeated, I guess theoretically it would by these wordings, but this is only cards that you took control of, and that can't apply to leaders and bases. So I don't think that that's something that we need to be concerned about at this point in time. Alrighty. Twin Suns. We got a question about Twin Suns right at the beginning of the show, so we're going to dive right into it. Twin Suns is a multiplayer format with a few different deck building restrictions. One is that you have exactly 2 leaders instead of exactly 1, and they must share either the heroism or villainy aspect. You must have exactly 1 base, as per usual, and a minimum of 50 other cards in the deck, with the release of Jump to Lightspeed Set 4, which I believe is likely going to be March, or has been announced to be March. I can't remember. I think it's announced, or I'm just speculating wildly. With that release, the deck size minimum will go up to 80, and you can have only 1 copy of any card in the deck. In addition to having the initiative counter, it will also have blast and plan counters. These are counters that have a triggered ability when you claim them. Blast deals 1 damage to each opponent's base, and plan, when claimed, you draw a card and then put a card on the bottom of your deck. These counters work very similarly to the initiative counter. Only one player can claim them each round. And as a difference from Twin Suns and Premier, players cannot pass unless all counters have been claimed. Therefore, if you want to do... You don't have the option to do nothing in Twin Suns. You generally won't be passing until all 3 counters have been claimed, and those players are automatically passing. So you can't wait to see what somebody is going to do, because with 3 other players in the game, that's going to happen a lot more frequently. Finally, the way the game ends changes pretty dramatically. When the first player is eliminated, the Conqueror heals their base for 5 damage, or when any player is eliminated, the Conqueror heals their base for 5 damage. And after the end of that round's regroup phase, the game will end, and the player with the most remaining HP wins. If there are multiple players with the same amount of HP, they'll share that victory. If you eliminate a player after the first player's been eliminated, you'll still heal for 5 damage. And so that once one player goes down, you finish the round that you're in. Each player gets a couple more turns. You have your last chance to eliminate somebody else, heal for a little bit, get that last little bit of damage in, and then the highest life total, or highest remaining HP, wins the game. And that is Twin Suns and formats. Do we have any questions about how all of this stuff works before we move on to our good friend, the tournament regulations? Tennessee Feet Monk asks, in response to Justin Leon's question earlier, does anything take control of an opponent's leader now? I don't believe anything does, and if you do have an effect that somehow lets you take control of an opponent's leader, it is instead defeated and returns to their base zone instead. But we will be moving on to the tournament regulations in just a moment, unless anybody has any questions. Tennessee Feet Monk says, will Twin Suns and draft sealed rules be on the L1 test since it's not official for sanctioned events? So, Twin Suns and draft and sealed won't generally be... They can be in official events. Pre-releases are official events. They are sanctioned by FFG. They have prize support with promos and that sort of thing. They're just not competitive events. L1 is intended for store level play, and so you're expected to be able to run pre-releases certainly, which means you have to know sealed, and being able to run draft nights and weekly play are pretty key to many store level experiences, so they will be on the level 1 exam to some degree. Level 1 is focused on casual tier play, which includes these events. It's a good question to ask. Always getting that clarification is important. If something is not covered in these lessons, and I'm going to sneeze. If something is not covered in these lessons, I will not ask you questions about it on the test. It's unfair for me to teach you a bunch of stuff and then ask you something I didn't teach you about. However, it being the lesson doesn't mean it will necessarily be on the test, but I do expect to have a small number of questions about draft, sealed, and Twin Suns. A significant number of players will still play these formats, even though Premier is currently the predominant way that most players play and engage with the game. A lot of people also come into the store only for pre-release, and so their only organized play experience is going to be with sealed. Alrighty. Now we're just going to cut on over to tournament regulations. So, the tournament regulations... Octernal says, tell that to my finance professor. I didn't teach you about 20% of what's on the final. Good luck. I mean, give me your finance professor's contact information and I'll send them an email about my opinions on how to teach people and how to test them effectively. I think what I'm trying to do here is make it so that everything... I'm not testing your... I want to test your knowledge in a way that is reasonable. There's times when I'll screw up, but I generally don't want to be testing your reading comprehension or your mathematical ability. I don't want to test your strategic knowledge of the game. I just want to test your ability to run good events, which is difficult. Years ago? That's unfortunate. Well, now you can just write them an email being like, I think that your decision was still bad, and I think about it even years later. Please get better, Octurnal. I encourage feedback. Maybe be a little bit more diplomatic than that, but I strongly encourage feedback. Also, if you ever think any of my questions that I'm asking on exams are out of line, please give me feedback. I want to make sure that the tests are reasonable for everybody who's taking them. Speaking of reasonable, let's talk about some regulations. This is the first time we're diving into an official document outside of the comprehensive rules, which is exciting. The tournament regulations and the master event document, which will be Thursday's lesson and will be covered on next Tuesday's broadcast, these don't technically apply to kitchen table games at home or even pickup games at your local store. They should apply to events where players are playing in some degree of officialness, whether it is official and run by affiliate of FFG, if it's a store just running their weekly play, or even if it's your college club running games. And it's some people will just kind of ignore these rules or will feel like some of these policies are unnecessary. Some people you're not going to play best of 3 when you're playing at your kitchen table. You're going to play as many games as you want. So these are good guidelines for how you should be playing games outside of events, but they generally will be how things are enforced at events. One of the things that's important about these documents is setting up good expectations for how players play. Having policies that enforce how people play the game means that whether you're in the United States or in South America or in Europe or in Australia or in Japan or anywhere where the game is played, if you're on the moon, if you're on the space station, whatever, if you're in an event, you're able to have an expectation of how the game will be played. And that's hugely important for the respect that the organized play system gets. If it's just run in the way that whoever's running the event wants to see their events run, so some stores run 20-minute best of 3, other stores have untimed best of 5 as their Swiss, you run into a lot of player confusion, a lot of player disappointment. A player signs up for an event, they find out that it's single elimination, they're shocked to discover this, and they have a poor experience after they lose one round. Similarly, if a player's expecting best of 1, but the event they're in is best of 3, they're like, hold on, I blocked out 3 hours for this, and now you're telling me it's going to take 8? I don't have time for this. Checkered says 20-minute best of 3. Yeah, you just got to play really fast. Really, really fast. Don't think about your decisions, just turn things sideways and say math is for blockers, even though that does not apply here, and you as the tagger generally have to be doing a lot more math than you do in other games. I haven't heard of a store doing 20-minute best of 3, but yeah, I think it'd be a lot of Sabine, maybe some Han, maybe some Tarkin Yellow. Anyways, this hypothetical world, who knows what happens. But for the tournament regulations and master event doc, these documents are both living documents, more so even than the comprehensive rules. While the comprehensive rules is receiving updates with every set to adjust for new card mechanics, the tournament regulations and master event document are going to grow in response to how players play the game. Something that we don't currently have in the tournament regulations document is, or in the master event doc or anywhere else, is communication policy. Where is a player allowed to reverse a decision? What sort of shortcuts can be taken? When is out of order sequencing allowed? That sort of thing. And so these documents will grow over time. Some of this policy doesn't... It's impossible to cover everything that a human can do with a game in a 40-page document, because humans can do a lot of things. But these documents are a great place to start and to get the philosophy of how we want to run events, which is we want to make sure people are having fun and that the games that they're playing are fair to everyone and are being played as close to the comprehensive rules as wanted. Fel Foxhound says our store does best of 3 50 minutes. Is that right? Tournament regulations say best of 3 is generally going to be 55 minutes. If you want to flex on that, you can a little bit, but you're more likely to run into players having draws at 50 minutes than at 55 minutes. Lou Cordero says tournament regulations also protect judges, so there are fair expectations in place and they don't have to announce every single thing or be blamed for it all. Yes, 100% absolutely. The tournament regulations, and more so policy, is in place to protect judges. When you give somebody a warning for an error that they committed, or you issue a game loss for tardiness, when somebody says, "How dare you, judge? How dare you give me a game loss?" you can say, well, you were 7 minutes late to your match, and this document from the publisher, which you implicitly agreed to by signing up for this event, says that you should receive a game loss for this. Being able to understand the philosophy behind it lets you explain to them, well, by showing up 7 minutes late to the event, we need to make sure your opponent gets the full 55 minutes that they are entitled to, so we have to give you a 7-minute time extension. But we want to not incentivize players to show up to their matches whenever they want, and so there has to be a pretty strong penalty here. And so there is a game loss for being this late. You were 7 minutes late. The other 120 players in this event were able to find their seats on time. So this isn't just like our announcements work bad, that sort of thing. But yeah, the document gives you a shield that says this is what official policy says, this is what you have to do. And this is one of the reasons we generally encourage judges to never deviate ever and always follow policy. However, as mentioned, policy can't cover everything. And so if policy doesn't cover something, you are able to deviate from what the rules as written say to do what the rules intend you to do. Tennessee Feet Monk says players don't read the tournament regulations, players don't listen to the player meeting, be prepared to have many shock players that need to be educated. Yes, absolutely. You would be surprised by how many people don't understand all of the details that are going into the game, but again, they also don't read the comprehensive rules. This is why judges exist, so that we can explain the tournament regulations and master event document to players in clear and understandable ways and explain the logic behind some of the decisions and the philosophy behind some of the decisions and potentially the consequences of these decisions if this policy isn't enforced. But Level 1 is focused on casual tier events, and so while maintaining tournament integrity is still fundamental, the stakes are much lower, and so it's going to be safer in general to put an emphasis on education rather than strict enforcement. We're going to go into more detail in the Level 2 lessons, particularly regarding competitive tier events, because that's what we talk about in... That's what that level is for. Alright. Oh boy, that face is moving and talking and is not going to distract me at all, because that's my face, and that's weird. Anyways, I'm just not going to look at that screen. There are 2 tiers of events, casual and competitive. There are pre-release events, there's weekly play, so casual and competitive, 2 broad tiers. Casual is pre-release, weekly play, store showdowns, and side events at larger tournaments. Notably, casual tier doesn't mean casual fans. One of the things that the story that I bring up in here, and the story that somebody brought up to me before is like, yeah, I know somebody who like shows up to pre-release and that's about it, doesn't play any other games, but they have full Darth Maul face tattoos and have implants so that they can have metal horns drilled into their skull so they can have Darth Maul horns. And like, that person isn't a casual fan of Star Wars. Maybe they don't play Star Wars Unlimited at a competitive level, maybe they're not interested or ready for it, but that doesn't mean they're not deeply invested in the game. Star Wars is a property that comes with a lot of obsessed fans. I would gesture behind me to all of the Star Wars paraphernalia, but you don't have to be deeply invested in the competitive nature of this TCG to be a deeply invested fan. Furthermore, even if somebody's playing in a competitive event and is excited to be there, every player has their first competitive event where they don't know the policy at all. As Tennessee Feet Monk says, players aren't going to read the tournament regulations or the master event document. They're probably not going to read the comprehensive rules. You can't expect perfection from any player, much less every player. So have some flexibility with them. Alright, so there are a few different formats available for play for sanctioned events. We covered the formats, generally speaking, in the previous lesson and about 10 minutes ago in this broadcast. One distinction that the tournament regulations cover is sideboards. In best of 3 matches, you have up to 10 cards as your sideboard in Premier, and in Limited, you have, as mentioned, that huge sideboard of all the cards in your card pool that you're not playing. Notably, when you are sideboarding, you do not have to exchange cards 1 for 1. So if you add 5 cards from your sideboard to your deck, you need to remove between 0 and 5 cards from your main deck before proceeding to the game. As long as you meet the minimum deck size of 50 in Premier, you can side in every card from your sideboard. And again, we go over how players can dramatically change their decks in limited best of 3. Yes, Tennessee Feet Monk says you cannot go from 51-9 to 50-10. Correct. You cannot increase the number of cards in your sideboard over what you started with. But you can go over what you started with in your main deck. Alright. Tournament preparation. Players are expected to come with a bunch of things. One of them, which is going to be the hardest to get players used to for a while, is going to be identification. Their unlimited identification number, or UID. You theoretically are required to use this for all official events, so that means pre-releases, weekly play, store showdowns, planetary qualifiers, and up. I think that a lot of stores aren't going to track this effectively, particularly at the beginning, but over time it'll become more close to second nature. This UID is very important to players and to stores. This is how you track a player's event history. If a player wins a planetary qualifier and receives buys at Galactic Championship, those buys are attached to the UID that won the planetary qualifier. And so, if you win a planetary qualifier, you're going to want to make sure that you have a UID. Otherwise, you're not going to get your buys at the Galactic Championship, or in future years, you won't get your invite to the Galactic Championship and won't be able to participate in that event. Next up, you have to have a deck. This should be self-explanatory, but it is the player's responsibility to keep an eye on their deck. If their deck is lost, it is unfortunate, and you are able to help as best you can, but it is the player's responsibility to keep an eye on it. And if a player loses their deck, proxying the whole thing is not... I don't believe that that is a reasonable decision to make. If a player loses a couple cards, maybe that, but it is the player's responsibility to hold on to their deck. Sleeves are required for competitive tier events, but are recommended for casual, as it is much easier to have marked cards without sleeves than with sleeves. However, even if you do have sleeves, you must make sure that the deck is not marked in any way, and that the sleeves between your sideboard and main deck are the same. That way, you're not able to gain an advantage or have some information available to you by the coloration or wear and tear on your sleeves. If you're playing in larger competitive events, I think most experienced players recommend changing sleeves roughly every 20 to 30 matches if you want to avoid any marked cards penalties, because over time, as cards are used or sleeves are used, they become dirtied or bent in the corners or warped a little bit and can become marked. It does become an expense if you play at a lot of competitive events, but making sure that you don't get marked cards penalties is worth it for a lot of players. Players also have to bring game pieces required to maintain a clear game state. This is going to be damage counters and tokens, epic action counters, reminder counters, that sort of thing. Finally, Note taking. Tennessee Feet Monk says sleeves required for sideboard. Policy as written says that if your deck is sleeved, your sideboard must be sleeved in the same sleeves as your main deck. I might be misreading things. Let me see what I have in front of me. That's the wrong document. Let me jump to 3.2.2. It said, so in 3.2.2 in the tournament regulations, it says all sleeves on the draw deck and sideboard must be identical in size, color, art, and design, while also being opaque. To this, it means that they, I guess, like, generally, I'm not going to penalize somebody for having their sideboard in different sleeves as long as when they are in the main deck, they're in the same color sleeves. Like, that's what I care about. The technical language here isn't as important as it is in the comprehensive rules. These have a lot more leeway for interpretation, and so really it's, if the card is in the player's deck, it needs to be indistinguishable. So that means if you have different sleeves for your sideboard and main deck, just swap them out when you swap cards in. MVG Hell says, for UID tracking, we've found it helpful to keep a list of our players and their UIDs, though once they are set up in Melee, it is moot. Yeah, I think that over time, players are going to get their Melee profile set up so their UIDs are in there. Tournament organizers are going to have to ask questions about that less frequently. But yeah, hopefully UIDs get taken care of with time. Tennessee Feet Monk, you don't want to miss a test question because of this. This has, one, enough ambiguity, and two, I don't think that this is of enough importance that I would put it on a test. Again, one of the challenges we're facing here is these documents are living documents and we'll see a lot of growth. The thing that you should take away from this lesson is, if you're taking cards from your sideboard and putting them into your main deck, if they are sleeved, they should be indistinguishable from cards in your main deck. That is to say, if cards are in your sideboard and are in different sleeves, that's okay. But if cards are in your main deck, even if they were previously part of your sideboard, they should be in the same sleeves as the other cards in the main deck, if that makes sense. As we wait for that answer, we're going to talk a little bit about note-taking. Players are not required, but are allowed to bring notes to an event, but may not refer to them once they have arrived at their match, even between games. Players can take notes during a match, and can refer to those notes throughout the match, but their notepad must begin blank. That means that you can bring like a life pad or a notebook, and at the start of your games with a new opponent, you have to demonstrate that you have no current notes, but you can mark down, okay, they're playing Tarkin Yellow, I need to keep an eye out for these cards, or I saw this card when I Probe Droid them earlier, and I want to make sure that I don't forget that they have a Cunning in hand, that sort of thing. Even though I don't know why Tarkin Yellow might run a Cunning. Anyways, players are not required to show their notes to other players. They are required to show and explain them to judges, should the judge ask what the notes are. And the most frequent notes that players are going to take are going to be damage totals, particularly damage totals on bases. However, if a player does so, they must also track damage totals with counters on the base. I do generally recommend that players track damage on both bases on a piece of paper. That way, if a discrepancy comes up, we have a record to look at. And while this information can also be incorrect, life total discrepancies come up in, say, Magic the Gathering, where people use paper all the time. It's a lot harder to jostle and accidentally change the numbers on a written life pad as it is to jostle some dice and change the numbers on those. Plus, with history, I can say, okay, I see you went from having 20 damage on your base to 22 damage on your base, but I don't see any unit that has 2 power. How did you take that 2 damage? And so I strongly encourage all competitive players record damage totals to both bases on a separate sheet of paper so that in case there's a discrepancy, we can look at that and dig up the history. Alright, next up, cards must be legal. Cards can be played after the set's release, which means you have to wait. If you open a card during a pre-release, it is not immediately legal for play. You have to wait until the set is fully released, with the asterisk of if the card is a reprint and is already legal in the format that you're playing it in, you can play that printing of that card. An example that we give is you could play a Shadows of the Galaxy printing of Underworld Thug after the Shadows pre-release because it had previously been printed in Spark of Rebellion. Cards can have signatures, but no other modifications or alterations are allowed to the art or to the physical card. Cards can be in any language so long as the card is a legal, officially released card. That means no matter where you're playing, it is entirely legal for a player to be playing with English, French, German, Italian, or Spanish cards as long as they are officially printed cards. However, like with the rules, the English version of the card is the authoritative reference, so if there is a difference between a translated card and the original English printing, you will refer to the original English printing, which is also available on the Star Wars website, or Star Wars Unlimited website, when making rulings. We also are going to talk briefly about marked cards, proxies, and counterfeits. Sometimes a card will be marked. Either it is warped or gets damaged, and it is distinguishable while face down. These cards must be replaced by the player. As a quick aside on marked cards, if you look at any card long enough, you would be able to find some sort of marking on it. If you look long enough and closely enough, every single card is marked. They are not actually physically identical. That's how the real world works. There will be a speck of dirt or a little ding in a corner. However, if you have to really look for a card, like the mark on a card, if it's not something that you see easily, it's not marked. Like, some people are like, well, if under the certain light, if you have your head on the table, you can tell that. And it's like, if your opponent has their head on the table and are shining a flashlight at their deck, opponent's going to call a judge and we're going to be like, hey, what are you doing? And we'll find this issue. If it's not visible from normal play, so the deck is on the table and you are sitting at the table playing normally and you're not able to see the marks on the cards there, that means that it's not a marking that a player could take advantage of. If it's not possible for a player to take advantage from playing normally, it's almost certainly not a marked card. Now, sometimes a card will be unplayable for an event. A player accidentally bends their opponent's card while shuffling in pre-release, or there's some sort of other wear and tear and the player isn't able to acquire a copy from either the venue or other players. You can consider issuing a proxy. A proxy should have the appropriate card back if possible. That way it's not visibly different when shuffling up, even if the sleeves are slightly transparent, which a lot of sleeves unfortunately are. The judge should both sign it with their initials and mark the date on it, because the proxy is only valid for that single event, and the player should spend some time before their next event trying to find replacements. Finally, there are counterfeits. Counterfeits are any unofficial card and are strictly prohibited. You just can't use them. Similarly, proxy or counterfeits that are like leaders or bases that have different art, not allowed. So just having a third-party design of a card, even if they're not trying to pass it off as an official card, is not allowed in a competitive event. Just Leon says, yeah, there's a problem on Han Set 1 leader unit when it got translated into French and maybe German. I'm curious to know what that translation issue is, but I am not terribly surprised. The game is very technical in its language, as many of you are already aware. There's a distinct difference between when played and comes into play. And a translator who doesn't also have a technical understanding of the game's mechanics might translate those two phrases into the same language, which changes the card mechanically, which is an important distinction to make. Also, when you're translating hundreds or thousands of cards, which these folks are doing, eventually you'll make a mistake and somebody will not catch it on the editing pass, and then you'll get cards that are missing important keywords or abilities that make them function. This happens with some occurrence. I can't say how often it occurs in Magic the Gathering, but it's something that happens every few sets. Somebody's just like, oh, by the way, this card in Portuguese doesn't have this keyword, which is important for the card to continue functioning. It'll happen, and you look to either the database essentially to see what the card's wording is supposed to be. Alrighty, tournament structure. So, a tournament is divided into phases, phases into rounds, rounds into matches, matches into games, games are divided into their own rounds, phases, and turns. It's a little bit much, but generally at casual tier, you're going to have just Swiss rounds and no single elimination or top cut, because again, at casual tier, you're not super competitive. Swiss rounds means that players are paired against another player with a similar record to them, and you then play some number of Swiss rounds, and from there you're able to determine final standings or standings before a top cut. Single elimination, it's in the name. If you are defeated, you are eliminated. Matches will either be single game or best of 3. Single game matches are played exclusively in casual tier events and never in competitive. Players do not sideboard, and a round is 25 minutes long for the game. Best of 3 matches are played at all competitive tier events and sometimes at casual tier events depending on a store's needs and the community's desires. Players play games until one player has won 2 games and that player is the winner of the match. If the game is a draw, it does not advance either player's wins. Players have 55 minutes for the match and 75 minutes if the match is during a top cut. When planning a tournament, you're going to want to have a number of rounds laid out based on this chart that we have displayed here, also in the lesson, and also in Tournament Regulations 4.4. If you have, say, 15 players, you're going to be in the 9 to 16 range, and so you should expect to play 4 rounds. Some stores for casual tier events do not play full Swiss because you're not looking to have one undefeated player at the end of the tournament. Very frequently, it is going to be 3 or 4 rounds, and that's just how it's going to be, a flat number of rounds. That's going to be a very regular occurrence for casual tier events. The number of players and the number of rounds is essentially how many rounds you need to have one undefeated player at the conclusion of those rounds, and so you can have a winner. It gets tricky at higher values because you start to have draws and drops, and the math is no longer perfectly square. But at smaller table number or at smaller player counts, you're more likely to have everybody stick around and to have fewer draws, and so it is nice and square. Now, when time is called in a round, if players are still in a game, they finish the current game round, including both the action phase and regroup phase, then play one more action phase, at which point the game will end. In a single game match, if the game ends without a player winning, the game is a draw, which results in neither player receiving a match win for the round. In a best of 3 match, the player with the most game wins wins the match. If players have an equal number of game wins, so let's say player A won game 1, player B won game 2, and they're in the middle of game 3, the match is a draw and neither player receives a match win. Many folks refer to this as double loss. It is technically not a loss. It is a 0-point draw, which does have, or 0 match win draw, which has some technical effects on tiebreakers. And calling it double loss, it's it's very similar to a loss, and in some cases it's worse because of how tiebreaker math is played out. But I generally avoid the term double loss because technically neither player is losing the match, because if one player loses, their opponent wins. Alrighty. There are a couple other things in the tournament regulations that I just want to touch on. They talk about randomizers, which is if you need to like pick a random card. This is also covered in Comprehensive Rules Section 8. This also talks about public and private knowledge and compares them to hidden and open information, which is covered in CR Section 1. There is some conversation about sufficient randomization, which is for shuffling your deck. After a player shuffles their deck, you must not be able to know the location of any card in your deck. That means you have to shuffle thoroughly, effectively. You must allow your opponent to shuffle or cut the deck, and if your opponent shuffles the deck, you are allowed to cut the deck after they return it to you, but may not shuffle the deck again. There's also something called, many people call it pile shuffling. I do not call it pile shuffling because it is not shuffling, and the rules call it out specifically. This is the process where you take your deck and lay it out into, say, 10 piles, and then just go through a circle, make each pile 5 cards thick, and then stack them up and do it again. This is not shuffling because cards do not end up in a random location after this process. If you know where a card is in your first pass of this pile system, you will be able to mathematically know where it is after you do this once, twice, 3 times. So it is not a form of randomization. However, players are allowed to do it before they shuffle and properly randomize their deck if they just want to count to make sure that they have the appropriate number of cards. So if you see a player laying out like 5 piles and going 10 deep on each of them, that is okay as long as after they do that, they actually shuffle their deck. Tournament regulations also cover tiebreaker math and some other, like, the tournament regulations have a lot of math in them with regard to how players are ranked. That's also covered essentially by scorekeeping software. If you want to look into it to understand it more fundamentally, you can. But we're not going to be asking questions about tiebreaker math on the test. That's about it. That was the second lesson. Great, we did it. If anybody has any questions, I'm going to hang out here for another couple minutes. But other than that, thanks for joining me. Good luck and have fun. Yeah, that's what we got. Just going to hang out just in case there are any questions to tie things up. And as a reminder, the next broadcast will be next Tuesday at this same time slot. I'm going to be, unsurprisingly, traveling again this weekend, so we're not going to have a broadcast on Friday. Then I think I have like maybe 2 whole weeks off in a row where I'm not traveling, so we'll do a couple of Friday broadcasts. Oh, Twitch hated those slides? That's good to know. How are the slides if you watch the lessons live? Or not live, but if you watch them on the website under the lessons, were the slides fine on the video, or was it just like an issue with Twitch and encoding there? Because I really hope it was just an issue with Twitch and encoding. Just Leon says, so when is the next test dropping? The current plan is we're targeting October 31st to early November. The last level 1 lesson is currently scheduled for Thursday, October 31st. We are working on some technological details and improvements to the website, including the ability to host tests there, have your level automatically updated, making sure that the level 1 endorsements are built into that, and tournament organizers can access your profile to give you an endorsement so that you can get your level automatically, and I don't have to do everything manually again, because that was a lot of work and we don't want to do that again. However, because we are waiting on these technological requirements, the L1 test might not be available for as much as another week following that. So October 31st is my targeted date, but it may take up to a week, week and a half beyond that to actually get it to work. My hope is to get the testing software enabled about a week earlier on the 24th, at which point I'll be able to transfer over the Judge Apprentice test to Nexus away from Google Forms. And then we can do and ideally I'm able to get some additional Judge Apprentice questions into that exam. And so that folks who have taken the exam previously but failed will have a second opportunity to take the test. And will be able to take the test on the system. We'll be able to dry run the system and make sure everything functions as expected before the 1,000 of you show up on Thursday night and say, hello, we would like to take the level 1 exam. So yeah, targeting end of October, maybe early November, depending on technology. We have several technological improvements and upgrades to the Nexus website that we would like to have, which includes testing on the website, having your actual location on your profile, the ability to set your profile to public, the ability for users to search for judges by name, location, certification level, and just filter and be like, hey, I'm looking for judges near Lyon, or judges near Berlin, or judges near Sydney, or judges near Los Angeles, and just be able to find certified judges near you, and then be able to either reach out to them via email or some other method to staff judges or to endorse judges. And then, of course, judge endorsements and reviews would be a part of that. And testing, profiles. Yeah, I think that's all the stuff that we want to add. And all of it is somewhat dependent on other parts of that puzzle. Like, to be able to search, you need to have profiles. To be able to do endorsements, you need to be able to search. To be able to have a test, you don't actually need any of those things. But testing, we've already demonstrated that we can do using external platforms, and so we might just end up using a Google form again, although we'd rather avoid that. But to do a test, we're going to want to have our own tools to be able to upload images and create game states and that sort of thing to give you a better testing experience. A whole lot of stuff. So targeting the 31st is the short answer, but no guarantee on that. I'm also targeting having an updated apprentice exam before that date so we can test out that software, but again, no guarantee on that either. The hope and the plan is that for the next wave of planetary qualifiers, the set 3 planetary qualifiers, Cascade won't have to do anything direct with regard to helping tournament organize staff for that. If somebody says, hello, I would like a judge, we say, here's a searchable list of judges, find a judge near you, reach out to them, or create a Google form, ask for applicants, and they'll be able to put in information, you can look them up. So that's the plan with that. Any other questions, or are we good? I'm not seeing any more, so I'm just going to hang out for like another 30 seconds, maybe a minute. Glad you all joined me today. Good to know about the videos. I will go through and disable the playback on the videos for future slides so that it is less of a problem with Twitch encoding. Is the test for L1 going to be open book again? Yes, it is intended to be open book. You know what? I can give you some spoilers about the test. Not specific questions, but the current plan for the test. I can't guarantee that this is how it's actually going to play out, but I've had it in my mind for a while. My plan is for it to be 25 questions with a 20-question passing score, so you need to get 80%. 17 of those questions will be rules questions, so questions regarding elements from the comprehensive rules. 4 of those questions will be policy questions, so questions about how do you fix certain problems, should it come up at your event, what warrants a game loss, what warrants a disqualification, where would you issue a warning. Those will all be questions about how do you handle this at casual. And then 4 questions about tournament logistics, some of which might be how many like how many cards are required for a limited deck, is it different for sealed or draft, etc., etc. CM5871 says, will the L1 test be off the current comprehensive rules or off the next version that will be out before set 3? It will be based off of the current comprehensive rules because that is what I have and that is what judges have been taught on. If there are questions, one of the things that I will be doing as part of the test process is taking the test and sending it to Ryan, the rules admiral at FFG, and being like, hey, let me know if, one, any of these questions are wrong, and two, if any of these questions are going to become wrong by the time people are taking this test. Because while we'll be testing on CR 2.0, there might be some things that change in CR 3.0. I think we should be fine, generally speaking, because we're not going to be talking about the things that are being changed, is my understanding, because we're talking about very fundamental stuff still. We're still, like, for example, one of the questions might be on how you order triggered abilities. I don't believe how the triggered abilities are ordered is going to be changed. So I guess the better answer is the test will be based on the most recent version of the comprehensive rules that's available. However, the questions are going to be designed so that they are somewhat resilient to changes in the comprehensive rules, so that if you learned on CR 2.0 and the lessons that we've already produced, you won't get something wrong because it changed in 3.0. We're probably not going to be asking questions about interactions that have changed mechanically between sets 2 and 3. Some of the questions may regard topics that have been clarified in rules clarifications directly from FFG, either through Twitter or Discord, or clarified through Cascade Games. However, all of those clarifications, if we're going to ask about them, will have been covered explicitly in the lesson covering that topic. So I don't want to bait and switch anybody ever. That's not the goal of this. We want people to pass. While we do have a pretty strong passing requirement of 80%, I still want folks to... I want it to be, again, testing your knowledge, not are you able to, like, did you confuse things? And it's going to be, we want it to be as close as possible to a test of your effectiveness as a judge, and you as a judge will be making rulings based on the most recent version of the comprehensive rules. I know that was a lot of rambling. I hope that answered your question, CM5871. Octernal says, if you want any sweet data analytics for judges, hit me up. I would love sweet data analytics for judges. However, I unfortunately cannot afford to pay anybody other than myself for data analytics for judges. I don't think I even have the money to pay me for data analytics. I wish we could have more data and looking at judge demographics. It's also dealing with personal data, and that's very difficult to share. MVG Hell says, I'll do it for free, lol. We here at Cascade Games strongly believe that people should be compensated for their work. Even if you wanted to do it for free, we would not accept it, because you should get paid for your work. If we're going to have data that is valuable to us, that value should be seen. And we furthermore think it would be very hypocritical of us to say to judges, make sure that tournament organizers pay you for the work that you're doing, and then turn around and not pay people for things. So for now, we're going to have to survive on me looking at the data that we have, which is limited skills because I'm not a data analyst. I appreciate, like, even if you already help the studios, we may have different lines of what we're comfortable doing. Other organizations that Cascade Games has worked with, other publishers, have been involved in lawsuits over what is and is not a employee-employer relationship, and so Cascade Games is very particular about how we handle those sorts of interactions. It would be great if we could get... I mean, If we were able to get more information and more work for the same budget, of course that would be great. But we also don't think that that would be fair to the people doing that work. Like, not only is it a legal liability thing, but also, like, people doing work should get paid. That's something that we believe in. And even if you want to do it for free, we think you should get paid. And we think you should be paid fairly, so not $1 for... Because I've had people be like, yeah, just give me $1 and I'll do $1,000 of work for you. And I'm like, that's not fair to you. And so we're trying our best here. It does mean that some things are going to be slower than we would like. We're not going to be able to get things off the ground, but it does mean that we can sleep comfortably at night. Just Leon says, I think 80% is fair when the people might be in charge of the experience of players. Yeah, absolutely. It's tough to write a good judge test. This is something that has plagued judges for decades for all sorts of games. And it's tough to have what a reasonable pass rate is. Can you imagine a judge, like, if you're a judge on the floor of an event and you get 2 questions out of 10 wrong when players are like, hey judge, how does this work? You would very quickly lose the respect of your players and your local community if you were wrong that frequently. So why do we accept 80% on a test? And part of that is the testing environment is asking explicitly harder questions and over a much broader range of knowledge. Half the questions you're going to get at an event are, hey judge, what does this card say? Can you read me this card? A bunch are going to be, hey judge, I forgot this trigger. All I did was I played it. I forgot the when played trigger. I said go to my opponent. They said I'm going to attack the unit you just played. And I'm like, wait a second, I forgot my when played trigger. And so most of the things that you're going to deal with are going to be relatively straightforward. We just want to make sure that you have a stronger understanding of, or a strong enough understanding of everything. The 80% is also wiggle room for reading comprehension issues. Something that comes up a lot of the time is somebody's like, hey, I misread 3 questions, and so, or I misread an answer because I switched 2 words, because these are very technical questions and very technical answers, and sometimes the difference between, as mentioned previously, when played and comes into play can matter significantly. And if you just cross the wires in your brain for a second, you might get a question wrong that you would get right in the real world, because you'd say, they'd be like, but isn't it a when played? And you'd be like, oh yeah, of course it's a when played. Sorry, my correct ruling is this. Here's why. And you don't have somebody over your shoulder saying, that says when played, by the way. And so some of the grading percentage is just for reading comprehension. Some is not knowing things. Because again, we're going to ask some questions that are a little bit more obscure. Ideally, every judge gets every question right all the time, but that's not how reality works. At some point, I might share some of the data I have on the Judge Apprentice exam. With that 80% passing score threshold, I think we ended up with close to like an 82% pass rate, which I think is a very good place to be. But with all that said, thank you for your time. I'm going to get out of here. Y'all have a good night, and I'll talk to you in the future.